Welcome to What is Black, a podcast centering the stories of Black people and culture to help raise affirmed, empowered, healthy, and thriving Black children and teens. Welcome everyone to another episode of What is Black podcast. I'm so excited to have author Bethany Morrow with us this morning to talk about her new book, So Many Beginnings. So Bethany, if you can let our audience know a little bit about yourself, please.
Yes, I am Bethany C. Morrow. I am the author most recently of So Many Beginnings, a Little Women remix. Previously, and actually I had another release just this summer. It was the second in my A Song Below Water duology. So the first one is A Song Below Water, came out in 2020. And the follow-up, A Chorus Rises, came out this past June. I am now a national bestseller thanks to that duology. I'm also the editor of a young adult anthology called Take the Mic, Everyday Stories, Fictional Stories of Everyday Resistance, which went on to be the ILA Social Justice and Literature Award winner for 2020. And my first novel was an adult novel called Mem, and it came out in 2018. It was an Indies Introduce and an Indie Next Pick with the ALA.
I love you just have all those things ready to go, because I think what's wonderful, right, is that I think for as Black women or just women in general, right, I don't think we do enough to call out the work that we've done, right? So thank you. Thank you for sharing all that. So, I know today we're talking about so many beginnings. And before we get started, I wanted to get from your perspective a brief overview of the book.
So Many Beginnings, as we call it, is a Little Women remix, and that means that it is not a retelling. It is not simply retelling the Alcott story of the March sisters by making them Black, because of course, race being a social construct, being something that's intentionally constructed, it has an impact on your everyday life as it was intended to. And so it would be impossible to retell a story of genteel poverty in 1863 with the Civil War simply as a backdrop. It's not possible to do that with a Black family. And I didn't make any attempt to do that. So this story follows the March sisters, the March family, as they have recently relocated after self-emancipating. They've relocated to a freed people colony on Roanoke Island, which is an actual place that did exist. And it's basically them beginning their freedom while the war is still ongoing, and also being in the shadow of the Union on Roanoke Island, being under the patronizing watch of and the infantilizing watch of the white missionary teachers who came from up north to supposedly educate them, despite the fact that they already had Black teachers there. And it's really, about the girls coming of age and coming into their individual identities at this really honestly horrific period, and in this transition, this national transition that they hope, of course, will be a new beginning, not just for them, but for the United States.
Oh, yeah. I think that's amazing. I love this idea of a remix instead of a retelling, because it took me a minute to really understand and sit with that, a remix, right? And, listening to other interviews you've had about the book, and just digesting the book and even reading your ending, it all made sense, right? It's like, okay, it's true. It's like, what would Black people have been doing in 1800? They probably would have been serving, the other stories, right? The other retelling, the other story of the four sisters. I don't even remember. I mean, I've read the book, but I don't remember those sisters' names. Now I have the march in my head, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of storytelling, right? I mean, you can have similar settings, right? You can have similar in terms of family construct, right? Daughters. But again, each of the perspectives is different, right? You can kind of, like you said, remix it, just shake it up, and just like it's a whole new different story.
It's a completely different story. And I have been on a panel with an author named Gwenda Bond who writes Lois Lane stories. And she said something really interesting kind of at the beginning of my process. with So Many Beginnings, she was talking about the fact that there are actually very few elements of the original property that have to be present for the reader to understand and appreciate that there is any connection. And as we find, they don't have to be very many. And that's part of the overrepresentation of the canon. That's part of the overrepresentation of things that we consider classics, is that even those of us who have never actually read those books, or have never, in my case, have never actually read The Little Women, I've seen film adaptations, but they are so heavily represented in our culture, in the American imagination, that there are things that we attribute that are not, that that didn't originate in Little Women, but we have been so indoctrinated with Little Women that there are elements that people automatically associate with Little Women. So four sisters, immediately the first thing that comes to mind is going to be Little Women, and then a boy named Laurie, and that's really the extent of what I really had to have present, that I had to have present for people to know that it was Little Women. And the only universal aspect of that story was the familial love and the four individual, very individual sisters. I do think that one of the characters was quite lacking and kind of only served the other sister stories in the original. And so my Beth story is different, and she is for me, she's a much more complicated and complex character. But there was very little of the original that needed to be present for people to understand and appreciate that there is any correlation with the original Little Women to begin with. And of course, I knew that I was going to set it at the same time period, and I knew that I was going to make it a truer version of the story, a truer representation of 1863 in the United States.
Which I think is important. Now, do you consider this book in the genre of historical fiction?
Absolutely. It is 100% historical fiction. It's another reason why it's a remix and not a retelling. There would be no way to do a retelling without keeping it in that fantastical sort of bubble that Alcott created. Um, no, this story begins with Patricia C. Click's nonfiction book called Time Full of Trial, which is all of her scholarship having to do with the Roanoke Island Free People's Colony. And from there, of course, I went into geological papers and just to get a sense of exactly what it would have felt like and been like. What are you eating? What's native to this island or to the surrounding mainland? It's absolutely historical fiction. It is, the historicity is the driving force of all of the character stories.
Which I think hopefully would be like a great teaching point, right? And that, again, for me, it was really, because when I heard Roanoke, I was thinking Virginia. I don't
Mm-hmm.
even know if Roanoke, I think it's in Virginia. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna,
there's
I
yes.
have a couple of degrees, but geography is not one of them. So, and then not even knowing that these free colonies existed.
Mm.
Yeah, I didn't know about that.
I knew, and I didn't know how I knew. So I've talked about this before, but the sort of the oral curriculum that can be passed down through Black families, because it is 100% not something that I was ever taught, that I ever got through formal education. And I've had what I think we could consider a good education, in that I went primarily to private schools, and then to very specialized programs, and then to a University of California for my undergraduate degree. And of course, what I was taught was the curated mythology of America, because we're not actually taught history. And anytime something is as incomplete as that discipline, it's laughable to even call it history. And what's even funnier is that the American imagination is so wrapped up in this mythology and this curation that people think they have an authority to know what is historical fiction, when what is normally presented as historical fiction is extremely fantastical. So it's interesting because you introduce it, it functions very much, real historical fiction functions very much like fantasy, in terms of world building and everything. How much work you have to do with the reader to establish this as reality, is it works very similarly to my speculative work, because the reader is so unaccustomed to actual history. I knew that for the majority of people, they were not going to have any idea that Roanoke free people colony ever existed. And I want, I want to breed a healthy skepticism in every reader, whether they're a young adult or not, because you think you've been taught history. How do you not know this? And more than that, the intentionality of what you're taught. Why do you not know this? Why are there plantation sites that have been maintained for hundreds of years that you can go and visit right now, today, and there are no such preserved free people colonies? When you understand that things are intentional, then you can sit with and you can interrogate what changes about the American narrative if we celebrate and demonstrate and even just tell people that free people colonies were a thing immediately, and that many of them were profitable, and that all of them were home to people who had just been forcibly enslaved for hundreds of years. I want that. I don't want it to just be like, oh, here's a cool new thing you didn't know. Why didn't you know this? What is the purpose of you not knowing this? What is the purpose of this curated mythology? What does it continue to perpetuate? And so and I can do all of that simply by showing it, because so much work and so much resistance is directed toward the excavation of reality and history, that it should be telling all on its own. The resistance that we get to telling the truth, on a national level right now, the resistance to teaching the truth, that should be telling in and of itself. And if it's not, okay, here are some more details about this time period. How does this change the American imagination, the American stereotype and dehumanization of Black Americans, if you know that they were enslaved and are not by definition slaves, and B, that they created immediately these free people colonies, and that someone had to intercept this progress. Somebody had to intentionally stop this progress. How does that change your thinking about the propaganda that you've ingested?
Oh man, I'm just taking that all in. That's very true. I just read something on Twitter this morning. It's a story, so it's not just just like a tweet, but how there's and I have to further read of it, but I think this concern about banning books, right, or removing certain books,
Mm-hmm.
and what that says, right, or legislation that says that you can't teach anything that's going to make people feel some kind of way, feel like they're racist, or make them feel less than. And again, it's that rethinking of, okay, what story do you want to tell, right? Is it all like roses and but there are thorns with roses? I don't know.
Well, and has that same sentiment ever been applied to anybody else? Have we ever not taught something because of how it would impact the feelings of a student who's not white? Have we ever said, I'm not going to teach Huck Finn because how is that going to make my Black students feel? Have we ever done that? Has anybody ever said, I'm not going to only teach enslavement, because what might that make a Black student in 2021 feel if the only historical reference to their people group is going to be enslavement, and let's say 3 people who we agree have accomplished something? What is that tacitly going to tell them? Has that approach ever been taken with anything but white supremacy? So again, it tells on itself, because if you were concerned with everybody's feelings, if history was beholden to everybody's feelings, if story was beholden to everybody's feelings, but it isn't. History has always been beholden to the feelings of white Americans. That's how you know this is white supremacy, because your feelings are actually important enough to be coddled to the point of lying, burying, completely denouncing, eradicating, like my entire history, my right to a history, my right to a genealogy, to understand the divorce that was intentionally done. My right to that knowledge comes secondary to your feelings. Your feelings have a right to stop that process.
We'll pause for a brief moment for a message from our sponsor. Education matters. As parents, we often look for new resources to teach about Black people, Black culture, and Black contributions to American and world history. Reconstruction is that resource for parents. Reconstruction provides identity-affirming education for Black students by providing a world-class curriculum that is affordable, high quality, and taught in small online classes. Created by a dream team of experts, they empower students in our community. They teach more than reading and math. They inspire kids and help them reimagine their possibilities. To learn more and sign up for a class, go to reconstruction.us. For 10% off any fall class, use promo code WHATISBLACK, WHATISBLACK. So I've been thinking a little bit about this in terms of, initially, one of the questions was like how did the characters help make you feel like a better person and or a writer? And I was thinking about, as you were talking, how did you find this writing process liberating in some way, given the power that you had to remix, right, and share historical facts that most people don't know about?
I mean, I feel the gravity of my work in every work, in all of my work. I don't feel any particular reverence for classics. So I didn't feel what I felt was if you pay attention to what Black creatives have been doing for the last couple of years, excavating American history, true American history, and Trojan horsing it into the national imagination by way of beloved properties. So I'm thinking the first episode of HBO's Watchmen with the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. I'm thinking the first episode even of Lovecraft Country, where suddenly people are, oh my gosh, are there such things as sundown towns? And while I don't at all buy that that attempt at ignorance, or that attempt at portraying ignorance, I don't at all buy that. I think that it's a very important work that Black Americans have always done, which is we understand, especially as a people whose work and whose creativity and whose talents have been appropriated relentlessly, just like from day one, literally even down to just like hymns and spirituals sung in a field. We, as people who are constantly being appropriated from, we understand the power and the influence of culture and entertainment and literature and anything that makes up, anything that falls into that. And so we've seen Black American creators specifically routinely use entertainment to bust open something that logically you would think, well, that's going to come in through education, or that's going to come in through this formal instruction, and it never does, because somebody's in control of what you learn there. And the way to do it is to come through entertainment and immediately bring it directly to the consumer, directly to the person, because no one can stop that getting into the American imagination at that point. And there's got to be an answer for it. And even if it's I don't want to deal with that. Well, now you've had to say, I don't want to deal with it. Now you're having to do something that is going to, again, showcase exactly what your motives are in your resistance to this. So I have always understood the gravity of that work. It's why traditional publishing matters to me. It's because it certainly doesn't legitimize me as a writer. There are plenty of writers and authors who are not traditionally published, but the impact that I want to see, the sociological disruption that I want to see, is possible through traditional publishing, through getting directly into entertainment. And so I felt the way that I always feel when I write, because all of my work is indicting the American imagination. All of my work is going to have social commentary. I was very excited to release it, and excited for the fact that people still, that while people are doing the very necessary work of trying to change academia and really fighting those battles, those are not my battles. I want to talk to everyday Americans. I want to talk to people for whom a lot of that academia is going to be inaccessible.
Because I was thinking, those the parallels, and maybe that's the wrong wrong way to frame it, of like a Lovecraft Country, um, the retelling of like the Tulsa massacres. But what I find, in terms of that parallel, right? So everything, your book as well as those representations, those, entertainment, um, visual representations are based in historical fiction. But I think where there's like this bifurcation is your approach to telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, like, so my initial reaction, like, I couldn't watch all Lovecraft Country, right? It was beautifully told, but again, for me, it was the trauma, right? The trauma came
Mm-hmm.
first.
I
And
did not watch past
correct.
the first episode of Lovecraft Country.
And there was it's not the same thing, but I think Colton Whitehead's book was adapted to a
Underground
film.
Railroad.
Okay, Underground Railroad. So I watched that I couldn't, like, after the
Mm-hmm.
first 40 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
I had to stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, it's like trauma drama, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to just, again, kind of pull from that a little bit, and your choice in telling this story, right? I don't know if it's
Mm-hmm.
because it's initially YA, but again, you tell the story with the history, but not leading with trauma. I think
Yes.
you lead with love, family,
Mm-hmm.
and freedom, right?
Yes.
Liberation through joy. And I wanted to dive into a little bit about your process in making that choice, or even if it was a conscious choice.
Oh, it was absolutely a conscious choice. That is the most Little Women aspect of my particular story, is the love. The reason it's revolutionary is because it's a quartet of Black sisters. And so while most things, and this is not a criticism of Colson Whitehead or anybody else's work, unless, it's something like them where it's very obviously, like, you're just traumatizing Black Americans because you're showing something that was never horrific to the general population. It was only horrific to us. And so if you lead with that, you're not doing something. You're not doing something of consequence, and you're also not doing something that's controversial. You're just attacking the same person that the state always attacks, which is Black Americans. But there are ways that people have dealt with things that are a lot more, that I say it's important that it exists, but I don't need to consume it. And that's the way that I felt about Underground Railroad thus far, and a couple of other projects, is that I appreciate the need for this because there's been such an overrepresentation of falsities. There's been such an overrepresentation of horribly simplistic, um, or white savior stories around enslavement. I'm not one of the people who says, okay, we need to be done with enslavement stories. Number one, because we have seen in this country, as soon as we stop telling the truth or talking about something, white America will pretend it never happened. It's the only way that you can get people who were literally alive during that time and certainly participated in sundown towns to be in 2020 like, are sundown towns real? It's real. You were there. Like, what are you talking about? So understanding how American mythology works, we cannot afford to be like, well, we don't want to talk about this anymore. What we do need to do is recenter who is talking about it and how it's spoken about. If I tell a story that is set in Black community versus a Black person who is surrounded constantly by white characters, if I show them instead entrenched in their community, in their family, the story changes completely, because now that is something that has happened or is happening, but it's not everything that's happening. It's not Black Americans were never single-minded. They were never as owned as whiteness needs to believe they were. So they have interior lives, they have interior passions, they have ambitions, they have and once you take the shame of enslavement and put it on the enslaver, which is as simple as literally using the correct language and not calling someone a slave, um, as soon as you do that, and as soon as you center Blackness, center multiple Black people, not a Black character, and then a bunch of white people, a Black cast, a Black community, a Black family, then we can focus on what was important to them. Then we can focus on how they interacted toward each other in a place of rest, in a place of safety. Then you get intimacy, right? So I think one of the problems is that a lot of stories, even when they involve Black people, are still being told to white people. And so it's focusing on, what do white people think the story is here? What are the stories that white people are accustomed to in this context? And I think that that is really, really dangerous because it is presence without representation. And I think there's a very there's an intentionality, of course, to wanting that, because then you can trick people into thinking you're getting full and complete representation here, and therefore what is said in this is truly who you are and is truly the extent of your experience at the time. And that's, again, that sort of gaslighting and constant, like, just deception and lying that Black Americans have had to exist with, is really detrimental. It's really destructive. And if it weren't, it wouldn't keep being done intentionally. So for me, it was very important to center the story in a place of safety, because from a place of safety, you have hope, you have love, you have intimacy, you have ambition, you have passion, you have personal convictions, you have divergence of ideas and opinions, you have the ability for each sister to be distinctly individual. If they are surrounded by white people, they just become a group of Black girls who are enslaved or formerly enslaved. When they are in their own setting, in their own space, in their own community, now they are four individual Black women, Black girls with very different personalities and very different ways of thinking. And we can actually give them room to breathe on the page.
Oh man, I'm thinking, like, when is your lecture? I'm
It
like,
just happened.
yes, yes, yes. Okay, I think it's amazing. Because again, I mean, you answered some of the questions I intended to ask. About this power of story, and also, initially when I created What is Black, it was really about, being a pediatrician, being a creator, thinking about public health, right? How can I use a platform to elevate and uplift, Black children? And I think
Mm-hmm.
you answered it, right? So, but if you have anything more to add, like, how do you think, again, stories, right? Especially stories written by and for us, right? For children. And I know this has a broader audience, right? But hopefully, when a Black child reads this, or any child reads this, right? They see something different.
Well, they see something that challenges, and this is the most important thing I think we can do, is recognize the onslaught of messaging, particularly anti-Black and misogynoirist messaging, that people are indoctrinated with before they even know that that's what's happening. Anytime you disrupt that, is a good thing. Anytime you give someone a particularly verifiably true information, that can cause some skepticism, and at the very least can make you realize these things you're taught are not scripture. And the institution that's teaching them to you should not be just taken for granted, that they're telling you the truth, or that they don't have a reason for what they're telling you. So that is extremely important to me. But my work is for everyone, but it will always be to Black girls. So my main concern is edifying, not educating. The education is going to happen just because everybody's been so woefully undereducated or falsely educated. That's just going to happen on its own. As soon as you tell the truth, like, you're educating, but you're not. It's not. And I don't have to, like, dedicate time and energy to that, because my audience in young adult is always Black girls. I am always edification first. I am always, here is just a beautiful image of you, because that is important enough all on its own. Who here are aspects of who you actually are, actually can be, that you might not be seeing other places. I see you. And if you are not like any of these girls, the multiplicity and the differences between them, I hope, indicate that there is room for your particular identity, personality as well. Um, and that while I'm doing the work of filling a space, that has been completely bereft of actual representation, I'm not trying to become the only one, and I want to dispel this mythology of there being one. Black girls deserve a feast like anyone else. So it's very important to me that people understand anyone can read my work and should read my work, just the same way that a lot of stuff has never been for Black Americans, that has not stopped us from being able to and having to read it, ingest it, interrogate it, understand it, analyze it, be graded on it. We have had to have cultural competence. And so I really always encourage people, become literate because you're not right now. Become culturally competent because you're not right now. And Black Americans are streets ahead because we've had to be. So it shouldn't have to be for and about white people and white children and non-Black people, non-Black children, for them to bring to it the same respect and interest and intrigue that we bring to so many other people's work.
And I think to me, that's also the significance of having like these four beautiful
Yes.
brown girls on the cover and on the back, right? So
Yes.
which is everything, Oh, all right. This has been a wonderful conversation. And before we wrap up, so for audience to learn more about you, where can they find you? Social media, websites, all the stuff.
You can always find me on Twitter. Unfortunately, I have no self-control. It is at BC Morrow, both on Twitter and Instagram. I do have a website. I don't know how useful it is, honestly, but it is BethanyCMorrow.com. I do have an author page on Facebook, but that pretty much cross-links from Instagram. So, but it is always Bethany C. Morrow. So if you're looking for my website or you're looking for my Facebook, it's Bethany C. Morrow.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Bethany. I learned a lot, and I've been edified today. So
oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. Thanks for listening. Music and editing for this episode by Manni Simon. We want to grow our community, so please tell a friend about the podcast and let them know that they can subscribe to the podcast wherever they listen to podcasts. Check out our website at whatisblack.co to learn about our work and to sign up for our newsletters to stay up to date about our exciting projects like our upcoming documentary, Reading in Black, celebrating Black children's literature. Until next time, wishing you peace, wellness, and joy, and a reminder that you're seen and matter.